per London Live News. Now, the Mayor is launching London's first citywide inclusion charter to help tackle rising suspensions, with thousands of children losing out on school learning. It comes after the equivalent of 1,400 learning days have been lost due to suspension or absenteeism in the capital alone, a 70% rise on pre-pandemic levels. 18 boroughs are already signed up to the principles of the charter, but the Mayor is calling on all schools and local authorities to sign up and take up the free offer of support. Well, earlier I spoke to the director of London's Violence Reduction Unit about the charter.
It's a real partnership approach towards thinking what we need in our schools to make sure that young people are kept in school and are also more encouraged to go to school. And it's been informed by research from 4,000 young people and teachers across London, and it articulates the kind of principles that we know young people want to see in school to make them feel safe and want to attend. So we had 19 local authorities sign up, a lot of enthusiasm for from lots of schools, and really hope it will be the start of taking very seriously some of the challenges that we've got in education.
Well, I've got some stats here. So the equivalent of 1,430 learning days for children are lost due to suspension or absenteeism in London alone, and that's up more than 70% on pre-pandemic levels. So why are we seeing such high and alarming figures?
Well, they are alarming figures, and you're right to point to the incredible rise in that. And what's important for us as a unit is that we know that we are all about prevention, all about early intervention, keeping young people safe, keeping them out of violence, keeping them safe from exploitation. And we know that if they're in school, that is much less likely to happen. And so it's of absolute concern for us that we tackle this issue. And what we've learned from speaking with young people and speaking to teachers, and this is really important that we learn from them rather than we dictate what needs to happen, is that they feel sometimes that school doesn't feel safe to them. There isn't a sense of belonging, so therefore there's not an encouragement to go, and sometimes it doesn't feel as relevant as it should. And the charter is exploring that in detail, using that research, using those conversations, using a lot of the good practice actually that is already going on across London to not only tap into what the problems are, but then start to turn that round and think about what works. And that's the exciting bit of the charter.
And I guess one of the worries on the other hand is, what are these kids doing when they're not in school? And that's a big worry. We've seen last year, 21 teenagers were killed in the capital, and the record in 2021 was 30. So there's always that danger of what's happening when they're not in school. And that's just a big part of this inclusion charter, isn't it?
Well, that's the motivation for us. So we were set up as a unit by the Mayor of London to look at prevention and early intervention to stop kids getting involved in violence and stop them being vulnerable to exploitation. And when we look at the key moments in a young person's life, what we know is that school is a real protective factor. Of course, it's the place where we want young people to feel safe and to thrive, but it does keep them much safer. And you look at the statistics in terms of, you've given the terrible statistics in terms of that increase in absenteeism, but actually look at the kids who aren't in school. Ofsted talked about twice as likely to carry a knife. We know people think they're carrying a knife to make them feel safer. We know the reality is exactly the opposite. Carry a knife, you're more likely to get into violence. We fast forward sadly and we look at our prison population and we see there that 1 in 2 have been excluded from school. So the trajectory for a young person who is out of school is much less promising for somebody who is in, and that's why it's integral to our work that we start looking at how we can get kids feeling safer in school and how we can work with teachers to make that a reality. And that's what this is all about.
So lots of conversations, lots of listening from your side of things to see how to help. So what are some of the early indicators of how this charter will set about trying to reduce these numbers?
Well, first of all, it will also look at what is going on across some of the schools in London. This isn't starting with a blank piece of paper. You know, there is some really good stuff where we see that when schools embrace a much more inclusive approach, they are working with young people, they've got them participating, they are really connecting up with extracurricular activities, they're beginning to think about investing much more in their teachers and about how they can give teachers time in the school day to be able to work in a way that many teachers join the profession for. We see the evidence of that. And those are the kind of principles that we have heard from young people, that we've heard from teachers, are really important to instill. And when we see those together, it's not as if attainment pulls away from attendance. It's actually, if you've got something that is driving attendance, driving a whole school approach, you're actually much more likely to see achievement as well.
Well, this sounds like a sort of a long-term initiative. As you've mentioned, you know, there's a long vision there as well to, you know, in terms of prison numbers and things like that. We also need short-term fixes too, as well, as we've mentioned with those numbers. How do we go about, you know, managing the balance between short-term and long-term? Do we need more police, community support? What other things do we also need to go hand in hand with this charter?
I completely agree with you. It's got to be a balanced approach. The only thing I would say is that this work is happening now in schools. In some schools, and it is therefore having an impact now. So yes, it is a long-term change. It's a cultural change, values-driven change that is important in schools, but it is having an impact. But so much of the rest of our work as well is looking at short-term as well as long-term. So, for example, we invest in youth workers in hospitals where kids have already come in being subjected to violence, and it may well be a moment for them to have a reflection and think about how their life could change. Similarly, we invest in youth workers in custody suites where again, there's that same moment for reflection for a young person. We're already providing mentors to kids who've dropped out of the formal education system and are in alternative education pupil referral units. And we know from the evidence there that works, that trusted adult, that a young person who's, you know, not in a great situation can really learn from, inspire, get confidence and think about something different for their future.
There we are.